Michel, yeah, we talked about it. Yields already at 17% for China dollar junk bonds. How high do you think they'll go?
Absolutely no idea, to be quite frank. Like as the events are unfolding, there are more questions than answers as we speak. You know, what we know is that there is a problem. We expect to see more defaults, and that instead of talking yields, we need to talk about dollar price, and at what dollar price it makes sense to start buying bonds that, you know, may well be restructured.
Have you guys been buying? And can you tell us what you're buying? If you can't tell us, can you describe them as closely as you can so we can try and figure it out?
Well, yes, we have been adding exposure to China properties, maybe a little bit too early. And really what we are focused on is trying to understand the liquidity position of developers, the quality of their land bank, and whether they've got exposure more to tier 1, tier 2 cities or tier 3, tier 4 cities. But ultimately, it's a liquidity game. How many months can you survive until at some point the central government will relent and start releasing liquidity pressures on developers?
So can you just walk us through where the value is in buying Evergrande bonds right now? Because we were just showing a whole list of them, and they're basically priced at, what, 20 cents to the dollar right now, in the 20s. Is it just you're assuming that somehow we're going to get some kind of signal or action from the authorities here to ring fence this to a point that we could get a recovery rate that's higher than what the market's pricing in?
Well, you know, just to be clear, I wasn't specifically talking about Evergrande before. In terms of Evergrande, the problems are really much deeper than with many other developers that are currently trading at distressed levels, because in addition to the liquidity issues that Evergrande is facing, they also have a portfolio and a land bank that is you know, relatively much poorer than many of its peers. So the problems are really deeper there, and what we're going to need to wait for is some form of restructuring plan that we expect will be very, very backdated, and where they will, you know, bondholders will need a lot of patience to have recoveries.
Michel, as you were just speaking there, and really not completely unexpected, this local bond of Fantasia, 7.5%, obviously onshore, has been halted, and I would imagine that's because it just moved quite a bit, and to your point, liquidity. Well, you know, the Fantasia development this week has brought up one, I think, salient observation that some analysts have pointed out, that offshore bondholders might be the last in line here in terms of priority, whether that's the Evergrandes of the world or the Fantasias of the world. Do you subscribe to that view, that the dollar bondholders are probably last in line here?
Absolutely. I don't think they might be. I think they are. It is very obvious that the priority is to complete units, look after contractors, payables, looking after home buyers, then looking after onshore bondholders, and eventually, if there is anything left in the pie, to offshore bondholders. You know, we all know that we are structurally subordinated. It's the nature of the beast. It's why we're getting paid for the risk that one is taking. And when the music stops, it can be pretty lethal.
Yeah, the music stops. How ugly do you think these developer defaults are going to look like then, Michel? Because with borrowing costs so high right now, this just becomes almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Where these borrowers default because they simply just don't have access to the financing right now to meet those imminent maturities.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Yvonne. And I think that at some point we're going to need some signs from the government that allows some liquidity to come back to the market, because right now it's not a double whammy, it's a triple whammy for developers. There's no funding offshore. The market is shut for the most risky one, for the single B ones. You can, you know, pre-sales numbers for September are catastrophic because home buyers, you know, partially are scared, partially don't have access to the mortgage market, and then the onshore banking market is pretty much closed as well, because most banks have reached their quota. So at some point, I think that the government will be satisfied with the lesson that they would have taught with those developers that have been breaching the 3 red lines, and we expect we'll bring back some liquidity in the market by enabling some of those measures to relax.
I mean, you guys.
Sorry.
No, go ahead. No,
and I'm saying that, and until we start seeing that sort of signs, which would lead to recovery in pre-sales, I don't see the offshore bond market being ready to underwrite new bond issuance, which which may lead, if we move into next year, to really a large wave of defaults.
Now, that I was just about to mention, I'm glad you brought up that last point, because it's fund houses like yourself that operate. I mean, I would imagine now is a very good time for you guys, right? Because things are really moving and things are trading where they are. And a lot of this, arguably, that's happening in China is the result of a conscious policy exercise on the mainland. And you guys operate in between that and a potential policy error. Do you think we get to the point where this can evolve into a policy miscalculation from authorities, and do we see that coming?
I doubt it. And to your first question, David, whether we are right or wrong, and whether it's a right by opportunity, we'll talk about that in 6 months. But ultimately, there are ways to solve the situation fairly quickly. So I'm sure that there are very smart people in Beijing who are monitoring this, and at some point we'll press on a few buttons.
And I have to ask you, just given the week that we had with Fantasia, I mean, this was a company that no one knew up until last week, and they had mentioned that before that they didn't really have the liquidity problems, and that they did have enough capital, and yet they still defaulted anyways. And now we're seeing what's happened in the junk bond market. What are you looking for in terms of the next flashpoints then?
The next flashpoints for us are really to see at what stage the likes of Evergrande come up with proposed restructuring terms for offshore bondholders. Unfortunately, that could take a really long time, and our experience teaches us that it can take many months before a proposal comes out, and the group is extremely complex with many different types of liabilities. So it could take a few months, but yeah, we want to see some form of restructuring proposal where that leads to a path for some recoveries for bondholders. And we also want to see some signs from the central government that relax some measures, and we want to see pre-sale numbers coming back, not necessarily in line with history, but at least recovering from the horrendous numbers we saw in September.